Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Roger Durling. I'm the Executive Director of the Santa Barbara International Film Festival, and I'd like to welcome you to the women's panel. And I also like to thank our presenting sponsor, Money to Fund, the Board of Directors of the Film Festival. You're in for quite a wonderful panel today with 6 extraordinary Academy Award nominated women. Before we start the panel, I would like you to see clips from the 6 nominated works. Please enjoy, and we'll be right back. Thank you. And now to introduce our panelists, please welcome Mary Soffries, costume designer, Babylon. Yes. Gwendolyn Yates Whittle, sound editor, Avatar, The Way of Water. Domi Shi, director, Turning Red. Hannah Minghella, producer, The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse. Ruth E. Carter, costume designer, Black Panther, Wakanda Forever. And Anne Alvergi, director, The Martha Mitchell Effect. And please welcome your moderator. She is the president of the Los Angeles Film Critics Association, as well the programming director of the Santa Barbara International Film Festival. Please welcome Claudia Puy. Enjoy, Claudia.
Thanks, Roger. It's so great to see you all here. So excited to talk to you about your wide range of films and all the things that you do on them. So I'm going to start off by trying not to have feedback. I'm going to start off by just kind of going over a bio for each of you so that everybody knows, where you're from and what you've done. Anne Alvergi is the director for the Martha Mitchell Effect. And these are all Oscar nominees, of course. So a round of applause for that. And many of the folks up here have been nominated many times, and some have already won. So this is not just like the first nomination for your veterans. And served as both co-director and editor of the Martha Mitchell Effect. Your other directing credits are for a doc short you made while getting your MA, Nightlight, and a TV directing credit in 2007. And you spent most of your career as a documentary editor, which is so interesting. Your top editing credits include Love Gilda, The Business of Birth Control, Bully, Coward, Victim, The Story of Roy Cohn, and Body Parts. Many of your films are female-centric or deal with socio-political issues related to and affecting women. So it's particularly appropriate that you're here today. And you've also curated an experimental film exhibition, which I want to talk to you a little bit more. We'll get more into that because your work has screened in galleries around the world. And you're also the owner of I Spy Films, a company that creates branded content, editorial videos, short films, and feature documentaries. From the company's website, you pair documentary expertise with creative storytelling. So you're a busy person.
You went deep in my bio.
Deep. Thank you so much for being here with us, Anne. And Ruth E. Carter, you almost need no introduction, but you'll get one, whether you like it or not, no. You're a native of Springfield, Massachusetts, and educated at Hampton University, which is a historically Black university. And I loved hearing that you're still in contact with a lot of the people you went to college with.
Oh, yeah.
That's so cool. And you studied costume design there, and you worked at the Santa Fe Opera. I found that really interesting before you began to work in theater and then in film. Your first film was Spike Lee's School Days, and you've been a frequent collaborator with Spike. You've also designed films for Steven Spielberg, Ava DuVernay, Joss Whedon, and Lee Daniels, to name a few. And your recent Oscar nomination marks your 4th Academy Award nomination. And in 2018, you were the first African American ever to win that award. So you're known for your versatility as a costume designer, and you've designed for films that are set in the past, at the present, the future, and places that we've never seen, but would like to, like Wakanda. And your career has spanned over 30 years. That's amazing. And I think I read that you just got a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame.
I don't know about just, but yeah.
Hannah Minghella, you are the producer of The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse. And a lot of people read that book, so as well as have seen the short. You used to be the president of production at TriStar Pictures and at Sony Entertainment, and then you left and became the president of motion pictures at Bad Robot, which is, of course, J.J. Abrams' production company. And you were born on the Isle of Wight. That just sounds so cool. What a great place to be born. And of course, we know from your father's side of the family, there's a lot of filmmaking there. Your father was the late, great Anthony Minghella, director of English Patient, and the talented Mr. Ripley. Your uncle is the screenwriter, Dominic Minghella. Your brother is the actor Max Minghella, so there's a lot of filmmaking in your blood, coursing through your veins. Your first credit was as a production assistant working on talented Mr. Ripley. And you've spent most of your career on the business side of the industry, so we'll talk a little bit about making that switch over. And then we have Domi Shai, who is nominated for Turning Red, has already won an Oscar for her short, Bow. And Domi was also born not in this country, in China, and immigrated with her parents to Canada, and became interested in art at an early age, because your father was a visual artist and was your teacher. That's so cool. Your family has inspired you in a lot of ways throughout your career, so we'll talk more about that as well. And I loved reading that both Bow and Turning Red, you have characters that are based on your mother.
Yeah. Well, after making Bow, I was like, dang, I still have a lot more to unpack with my relationship with my mom. I need a whole feature
Time to make a
film.
new movie.
Yeah, got to make a movie about it.
Love it. Well, I watched that movie with my daughter, who was out in the audience, so it's a mother-daughter thing. And yes, you won the animated award for Best Animated, the Academy Award for Best Animated Short Film for Bow, and you were the first woman of color to win that award. Yes. It's shocking to me that we have all these firsts still. You know, I'm glad the barriers are coming down, but it's shocking that it's taken this long. Gwendolyn Yates Whittle is the sound editor for The Way of Water, and also has been nominated before. Her first nomination was for Best Sound Editing for the first Avatar film in 2010. And that nomination made you one of only 12 women to ever be nominated for that award. So again, yeah, more firsts. And you've had a busy year. In addition to Avatar, The Way of Water, your recent credits include Top Gun Maverick, probably the two biggest movies of the year, and WandaVision, a huge TV show.
Timing, it's all timing.
Timing is everything. And before your career as a sound editor took off, you worked as a dialogue editor on over 100 films. Some of those include Fight Club, Saving Private Ryan, Titanic, little movies, you know. And you're a supervising sound editor at Skywalker Sound, a post-production audio house, of course. And later this month, I hear you're going to be awarded the MPSE Career Achievement Award by the Motion Picture Sound Editors.
I am, yes.
I'm sure you hear last, but certainly not least, when your last name begins with a Z a lot. Mary Zofries, she is the wonderful costume designer for Babylon. 4-time Academy Award nominee for Best Costume Design. And before being nominated for Babylon, you've received nominations for True Grit, La La Land, also with Damien Chazelle, and The Ballad of Buster Scruggs. You've worked a lot with the Coen brothers. You've been a consistent collaborator with them over 3 decades. We want to hear about that. And you've also worked with Chris Nolan, the Farrelly brothers, Nora Ephron, Steven Spielberg, Oliver Stone, all the big names. And you originally studied art and moved over into costume design. So we'll talk about that. So those are just a brief introduction to the wonderful women on this panel. I'm going to start with you, Anne, because you're sitting next to me here. I thought Martha Mitchell was really powerful, and I think a lot of us who are a little older remember her, and remember her very differently from the way you showed her to be. For those who haven't had a chance to see it, can you give us a quick overview of the film?
Sure. So Martha Mitchell was a very outspoken, effervescent, telegenic cabinet wife. She was married to John Mitchell under the Nixon administration, and she basically was sort of an outlier in DC, and, you know, unlike any cabinet wife we have today, was incredibly popular. There was a survey taken at the time that she was as popular as Jackie O. So she really was a household name, and she was on every talk show. And the Nixon administration loved it until they didn't, when she shone a spotlight on Watergate, and the administration contained her, and she was tranquilized against her will at a California hotel, and essentially gaslit through the rest of the administration.
Almost literally gaslit by being tranquilized.
Literally.
Yeah. It's interesting because when you think about it, we don't know the names of any cabinet wife. She was the wife of the Attorney General. Do we know the spouse of the Attorney General? No.
Absolutely not.
No. But, and she was nicknamed Moutha Mitchell for speaking out. And
The mouth from the South.
right. So what was it that fascinated you about her that made you want to make this film?
Sure. So my co-director and I, Deborah McClutchy, we're looking for sort of a female-driven film, and it was during the Trump administration, and we're really affected by what had happened to Hillary Clinton and the gaslighting. And we discovered Martha as this hidden figure in history, and couldn't believe that we didn't know about her and that she had been silenced, essentially. We started to dig more and more and more and realized that there was sort of a larger tale of gaslighting. You know, the more we dug into the White House tapes, we realized that Nixon and his minions, specifically Haldeman, really orchestrated this campaign against her. So it sort of became like a case study in gaslighting, where we could see her view, but we could also see their view through the White House tapes.
Yeah. And she wanted to, she was all about the truth, right? That was what she wanted to.
Yeah, she had a very strong moral compass and really wanted to speak truth to power. I mean, she had a lot to lose to cross party lines like that and speak the truth. It doesn't happen so often today.
Sure doesn't. Sadly. So you spent most of your filmmaking career as an editor, as we talked about, and this was the first official doc short outside of the one you did in grad school. What made you want to get out of the editing bay and behind the camera?
Well, I'm still in the editing bay. I'm still cutting other people's films. I think, as a documentary editor, you are essentially kind of a co-director. I know a lot of people don't like to hear that, but you're essentially writing the films in the editing room. And, there's only so far you can go, right? As an editor, you always have to take a backseat to the director. And I always knew I wanted to do more. And, it gets frustrating just being the editor. So I think, I was looking for the right story because I know that there are a lot of films that don't, that they start and they don't get finished for a variety of reasons. And I knew when I sort of heard about Martha that she was sort of a perfect documentary character. I mean, she's just, you can't not look at her. She's hilarious and amazing.
Yeah, it's so interesting for those who didn't know about her, they're fascinated, and those of us who did know about her, but I was a kid, I think, and I remember just thinking, oh, she's kind of a crazy lady, and suddenly realized, no, this one was trying to speak out and was silenced, and it's terrifying.
Yeah, and the parallels today are, essentially uncanny. It's the same playbook. I mean, if you want to dismiss your opponent, you discredit them, and often with women, you leverage mental illness or alcoholism, and that's essentially what happened to her. She became sort of an amusing housewife, from an amusing housewife to a crazy person.
Wow. So tell us about the experimental film exhibition that you've curated recently. How does that work?
It was a few years ago.
Okay, that's recent. Time is different since the pandemic.
Sure. I've worked a lot in the experimental space. That's kind of how I tend to work. I mean, this Martha Mitchell film is all archival. It's not specifically experimental, but there are no talking heads. That's typically how I like to work. So yeah, I curated it for this art gallery, the Walter Maciel Gallery in Los Angeles, and who does a variety of video installations, and just sort of recruited all my experimental filmmaker friends to be in it.
That's great. Okay. Is there any place that we can see your work, or any exhibitions coming up or anything?
Well, you can see the Martha Mitchell Effect on Netflix.
Definitely, yes. Yes, do watch that. Ruth E. Carter, you have broken so many major barriers. We alluded to some of them. Obviously, the first African-American person, not even woman, to win Best Costume Design. You gave that really wonderful, impassioned speech at the Oscars. I remember it so well. Do you feel there's more inclusivity now in the field, or have we progressed in any way? Have we gone backwards? Where are we?
Well, throughout the years, I've worked for women directors. I worked for Gina Prince Blythewood doing Love and Basketball. I worked with Betty Thomas doing I Spy. And even watched Ava DuVernay's rise by going to see a lot of her independent films. And these women were very strong. I mean, I feel that they knew that they were going to be up against brick walls at times, so they had, strength of character that I think was very unusual, because there were very few of them in this industry, directing especially. And as a costume designer, working as a woman working, I think we were always conscious of being very few, having to have that conversation with the producers and directors that may have a certain aesthetic that they were going for with women. So I think we all kind of felt these chains that bind, if you would, in the industry early, and there's less of them now. But I don't think it has progressed as rapidly or as vigorously as it could have in the years since. I think there's still a stigma that directors are male, and they're not. And our stories are being told more and more. We're in the room. When I sit across from Victoria Alonso at Marvel, and she's so supportive and positive, and she's always making a way for women, I say, this is the kind of change we want to see. She is the change she wants to see, and so she is that change. And so I do see a bit of a growth in inclusivity in this industry. I mean, look at us here today.
Yeah, I wanted to jump over to Domi because I saw you nodding, and you directed a film. You're the first woman ever at Pixar to single-handedly direct a Pixar film. Yet another first. That place is sort of kind of famously male, Pixar. You've been there for over 10 years. Tell us a little bit about what progress or lack thereof you may have seen.
Yeah, I think it's like Ruth said, change is slow, but it's happening. But I also feel like it's on all of us to keep the change coming, for me, I feel responsible for, now that the door is open, to hold it open for the next person to come after me, and to kind of pay forward all of the support and trust that I've received in my career at Pixar. And I'm always trying to scope out who can be the next director, storyteller, where is she? She's out there somewhere. I gotta find her too. Yeah.
Great. How about, Ruth, do you feel that way too? Do you find yourself make a point of hiring other people of color, or as a mentor?
Oh yeah, I was an intern, and I had amazing mentors, and I just work at trying to be what they were for me, for other aspiring costume designers coming into the industry. I always, do my best. They have, a creative way of bringing in new talent. They make it like a, Rubik's Cube, because you have to have insurance and you have to be in school, and so we're always trying to navigate the waters to give someone an opportunity. It's not easy, but we do it because I had some of the best mentors coming up.
Can you tell us who some of your mentors were?
Oh yeah, Linda Bolton Smith was a woman who, when I was ready to quit college and just drive back to Springfield, she's like, no, you're not. You're going to live in my house, and you will have your last semester here. And we became very great friends. She was a writer, and I watched from her example the discipline of an artist who every morning at 5 a.m. she went into her studio and she wrote for 2 hours before she began her classroom activities. And she was a great example of an artist who is impassioned by writing and story, and she shared a lot of her writing with me. I could go on. The mentors were there for me.
You're really lucky. That's a wonderful thing. Do you think your work in theater and at the Santa Fe Opera before moving to LA informed your work in the films you've done?
Yes, because that was my foundation, and I think as an artist you have to have a process, you have to have a foundation. Theater was a wonderful way of giving you the groundwork of creating an arc for a character, creating a color palette, being able to stand at the back of a theater and see how a play affects people with color and balance and composition. It goes from beginning to end in one moment, and there's an applause. So it's highly gratifying to have your work in a play, because you really do sit back and you evaluate all of the aspects of character. And I bring that to my work today.
So I have to ask you, because the costumes in both Black Panther and the sequel, Wakanda Forever, are so amazing. You've done some other amazing costumes as well, but what is the most challenging costume you've ever had to do?
I think that to infuse the tribal techniques of Africa into a modern film, and then bring in technology and not make it look forced, is challenging, to make things feel rooted in tribal customs, but not sitting back in time, is a challenge. To make things feel modern, yet honoring their forebears is also an honor to be able to display that. So I think the challenges were multiple. The Dora Milaje you could travel all over Africa with that costume, and it was important to me that as we developed this look, that they were taken seriously, that they were not in cheerleader skirts and triangle tops. The director, everyone involved, everyone who touched that costume knew that this was a uniform, and I was really proud that it was also very beautiful. It honored the female form by having elements that redirected the eye towards a new standard of beauty that wasn't in your face. So there's scarification on that costume, there's beadwork, there's tribal influences on that costume, and I'm really proud of that, but it was also challenging to, pull that together.
I can imagine, yeah. It was a real feast for the eyes, and I have to ask, since we have another costume designer, Mary, I had read in the Times, I think it was, the research involved in the early Hollywood costumes that you were doing for Babylon, but they were for the shows, so like in addition to the flapper dresses or whatever, you would do medieval warriors and elephant wranglers and all of that. So the costume requirements were huge.
Yes, the subject matter of the film was, the director, Damien Chazelle, wanted the opposite of what was traditionally thought of as a 1920s movie. And we were asked to dig deep into the research. And so it was the polar opposite. If a photograph, and so we were supposed to go, the pandemic hit, so we spent quite a lot of time of 2020 doing research. And it was just, I have thousands and thousands and thousands of images, and the task was to find inspiration that was from the 1920s that looked nothing like you would expect from the 1920s. And yes, the gamut, it was a lot of family photographs, historical photographs, photographs from motion pictures, stills from motion pictures, paintings, drawings that were in personal journals. Like, we dug deep. And thousands and thousands, it's like I had to expand my iPhone, the cloud like crazy. And, but what was great was that just, you get that time to research and to sort of let it all sink in. And then it was like this framework where then it allowed me to sort of just explode with creativity in terms of the design of the film. Like, I didn't feel like, I felt like it was all in my structure, like in your kind of knowledge and backbone, like in your college framework almost. And it was like this just tear of like, I know what she's gonna wear for that scene, and just like an explosion of like creativity. It was fun and exciting and really the hardest movie I've ever done. There were 7,000 background, and yes, part of, there were movies within the movie. I don't know if you've seen the film. If you haven't, please do. It's fabulous. And there was a scene, and it was scripted, and in the script it said 1,000 men on the battlefield. And I was like, do you really mean that? And because, oh yeah, we're not doing any CGI.
I was just going to say, CGI does those men on battlefields all the time.
No, there is not a single shot manipulating CGI for a costume in the entire film.
Wow.
And so that's kind of exciting. And but it meant, so I got started. That was the first costume I really tackled, was like, how am I going to achieve 500 each of, it's meant to be 1920s. And so again, like, that was just digging deep, and we looked at like Robin Hood with Errol Flynn and Intolerance, and just really analyzing how those films were made and getting into like the mind space of silent film designers. And their artistry was so amazing. And you think about like how they did their research, and like it wasn't influenced by the internet. They're looking at paintings and books and illustrations, and just how they interpreted how a medieval costume would have looked into the silent era. And it's stunning. Like, I recommend watching both of those movies I just mentioned. And so that was inspiring. And yeah, we started making the costumes and the pointy helmets, and we decided it was red against blue. And so it was just that, and it was endless. There was like scenes with like 200 people, 400 people. The clip we showed tonight was the only like sort of refined, sort of quote unquote 1920s movie. It's supposed to be a party at the Hearst mansion. But everything else was sort of off the rails and incredibly invigorating and really, really inspiring to do. But the gamut, like circus costumes and film sets, and we did a recreation of MGM Singing in the Rain, where it really is true. You can Google it. And that was another thing we recreated because Damien really wanted it. And it's how MGM introduced their silent stars to talking, and they're all singing the song Singing in the Rain, and there's a giant arc behind them, and they're all in pink raincoats with a pink rain hat. And so that was one thing that we did have to try to figure out how to do. And again, of course, there were 250 people. No problem finding that. So we ended up using shower curtain liners from the 99-cent store that I dyed pink and built. I mean, I have, like, there's endless stories like that. So it's like, taking each of these giant set pieces and figuring out how to accomplish it. And that's what Ruth and I were talking about earlier, like, how did you do Black Panther? You know, and how did you do Babylon? You're like, one step at a time.
Yeah.
And you have a team of incredible people and craftspeople and all. For me, we prepped and shot in LA. And like, I'll get teary-eyed if I hope I don't. Let me try to contain myself. But like, not only my crew, like just everybody was on their A game, right? They just were so into it. But craftsmen all over the city, like from cobblers to tailors to just painters and people who were building like 3D, not 3D, but like dimensional costumes, like roosters for me for party scenes, and getting into the tailoring of it all and the craftsmen of them all and the hand beading and the hand stitching and like taking them little like, this is a sample, can you make this into this suit that'll fit your brother? Max, who's in my movie, was in Babylon. But just like the tailors, like looking at these 20 suits that we found and like, oh, okay, I understand there's that thrown back shoulder and this is where you want the button and the lapel. And everybody was so into it. It was like, there's this just sense of pride. And when I got my nomination, like, I just reached out to every single one of them and was like, this belongs to you too, not just me. And I mean that from the bottom of my heart. And so it's like, it was a group effort.
I think people forget what a collaborative effort movie making is. Yeah.
That's why it's so cool.
Yeah. Yeah. How cool is that? Well, the shower curtain thing made me, now I have to ask you, Ruth, did you ever have any unusual materials for a costume like that?
Yes, I can't. You're putting me on the spot there.
I can give you time to think about it. We
I
can
have time to think
come
about
back
it.
to
I
it.
just know that, you know, when you have authentic materials like masks and things like that from Africa, and you look at the beadwork and you try to emulate that with modern beads or modern materials, it's really hard. So I have used like the real thing and you know, used the beads from it, like pulled the beads and applied it to something else. But nothing that I can think of like a shower curtain. I wish I had thought of that.
We went to every 99-cent store in the surrounding area. It was like, we had to have like 400 of them or something crazy. No, 600 anyway.
Hannah, I have to comment about your film because it was so sweet and so beautiful. And at times when I was watching, I was thinking it reminded me of The Little Prince. And other times I thought, oh, Winnie the Pooh. And then other times, Wizard of Oz. And then, of course, it's its own. I loved all the animals in it. And I know it's based on a very beloved book by Charlie Maxey from 2019. Was that daunting to take a beloved book and adapt it?
Oh gosh, yes and no. I mean, I think the reason to do it in part was because it was a beloved book and it had reached so many people. Charlie Maxey's a beautiful illustrator. And especially even before the pandemic, he was interacting with a very engaged audience online on Instagram. And he would draw pictures that he really wanted to kind of encourage people and give people hope during a very difficult time. And the book really sort of took on a life of its own. I had picked it up in a bookstore in London right before the pandemic on my last trip home to see my family, and had recently joined Bad Robot to run features, and JJ obviously is very well known for the world building that he does in his movies, but the company had never made an animated film before, and I remember sharing the book with him and saying, I think we should get into animation, but you know, it takes a very long time to make an animated feature film. Maybe we should start with a short film. And I found this book, and I just think the messages of it are so beautiful and so essential. And if you haven't seen the film or you haven't read Charlie's book, it's very much about encouraging people to be vulnerable and to ask for help when they need help, and to not, you know, see their tears as a strength and not a weakness. And I just found that profoundly moving. And I think all of us work on movies and love telling stories, and I think when we can tell stories that feel like they have a purpose and are putting something of value into the world, it makes it even more of a privilege and a gift. And so It was daunting, but we kept Charlie at the center of everything. So I'm one of many producers on this film. Charlie co-wrote the script with John Croker. He co-directed it with Peter Bainton. And it was really about, like, how do we bring these beautiful hand-drawn animation, illustrations to life? And we ended up having to find 120 2D artists in 20 different countries. Wow. And during the pandemic, everybody worked over Zoom. Everybody was remote, and we managed to make this beautiful movie.
So you made it all over during the pandemic. Wow, that's amazing. So what would you like people to take away from it? You mentioned a few of the aspects about it.
I think if Charlie was here, he would say to feel encouraged in life, to never feel like you're alone, to know that anything you're struggling with, someone else is probably struggling with too, and to ask for help and find strength in your friendships.
Well, that's so beautiful. And you come from a very artistic family, obviously, with a lot of filmmaking talent. What were the discussions like at your dinner table? They must have been fascinating.
I think for me, my dad, first and foremost, was a writer and a storyteller. So he really just instilled in me a love of stories. And so I loved to read and write growing up. But I really understood the business through his eyes, through the eyes of someone who was being vulnerable, who was writing, and then as I got older, became a filmmaker. And so I think when I started to think about, well, what's my place in the business, I didn't think of myself necessarily as a writer or director, but I did see myself as someone who would really enjoy helping other people tell their stories. And I learned early on about being a development executive and the idea that you could read and give feedback and identify projects and people that you thought had value, and then be the person to sort of help make that happen. And so I ended up going into the studio system with a great female mentor, Amy Pascal, who really was the chairman of Sony at the time. And I went to work for her, and then she actually gave me the opportunity to go run Sony Pictures Animation, which is when I first fell in love with animation. And from there, I went to Columbia Pictures, where I was president of production, and then, as you mentioned, to TriStar. So I had this amazing sort of 15 years at Sony, understanding the business side, but I think always holding on to that memory of what it's like to be someone who's creating and how vulnerable that is. And if you can create a sort of a safe space, or always come into those conversations with a creative person, understanding how much of themselves they're giving, then I think the collaboration becomes so much more productive and powerful and positive. So I think I always carry that, like knowing how much of himself my dad gave to the work that he created, and try to always remember that anybody I'm working with is doing the same.
Oh, wow, that's wonderful. Yeah. Your dad was a wonderful filmmaker. It's interesting you both mentioned having female mentors, and I think I read, Domi, your mentor was Pete Docter.
Yes, he's not a female.
Not a female,
fortunately.
no.
But he's awesome.
But you had a mentor, and somebody who obviously was willing to, in a place that's considered kind of a boys' club, or a field, I guess. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I first started at Pixar as a story intern back in 2011, and I was picked up after that to work as a full-time story artist on Pete Docter's film Inside Out. And I was like freshly graduated. Yes, it's an amazing movie. I'm so lucky that that was my first project ever, but also that, I was freshly graduated, didn't know much about the world or filmmaking. I just loved drawing. I just loved making people laugh and react to my drawings. That's why I went into animation. But I felt so lucky that I was put on a show where I could say that, yes, I have like a PhD in being a 13-year-old girl and going into the mind of a 13-year-old girl. Like, that's the one thing that I can be an expert at this job. And I leaned into that, and Pete encouraged that out of me. Like, he knew, like, he saw the landscape at the time at the studio and saw me, and he's like, you were once a 13-year-old girl. Tell us what it was like. And he created that safe, collaborative space in the story room where I felt comfortable, like chiming in, or if I would pitch a sequence, I would pitch like my boards, but then I would feel, like motivated or inspired to like add like a gag or like a new idea at the end, or pitch an alt, like, oh, like what if Riley did this instead of that? And he would always like be open to it. Like he didn't say yes to all the ideas I pitched, but he was always like down to like listen. And I think because of that too, like it gave me the courage to eventually just pitch to him this short film I was working on, like on the side, like just like on weekends, like after work, and it was Bao. And I just wanted his feedback because he just is such a nice guy. Maybe it's a Minnesota thing, I don't know. But yeah, I pitched to him this story I had, and I was thinking of just like making it on my own as like an independent like short film. I was gonna like I could animate it on my own or something, but he was really drawn to this story about this empty nester mom who consumes her child at the end. Like he loved that surprising, dark, twisted ending. And seeing somebody like at that caliber like be so excited about your weirdness and your ideas, like I think that like that's everything to like a young creative person, and I think that really like helped me lean into and find my voice as a storyteller early on, and that's so important. And I really like now that I'm kind of in this position, I want to be that for someone else too.
Absolutely.
That's awesome.
Well, you may get a lot of people reaching out to you after that. So I read that you were influenced by Spirited Away. You're a Miyazaki fan when creating Bao. Can you tell us, I know, that's one of my all-time favorites too. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, all of Hayao Miyazaki's films and Isao Takahata's films, like all of Studio Ghibli's films, I'm so influenced by and inspired by, because they made stories about real girls and young women who are going through the struggles of growing up, of life. They weren't like perfect, skinny, like beautiful porcelain, dolls or princesses or special in any way. They were like real girls. Like Chihiro in Spirited Away she's just this clumsy, a scared kind of wimpy girl who like goes on this journey through this magical world, and she like learns all of these valuable lessons about life, and she matures in such an amazing way. And that had such a huge impact on me, because I remember when I watched that, I was like in probably like middle school or the beginning of high school, and I was so amazed that this animated movie existed, because at the time it was just princess movies. It was just movies about these perfect, beautiful, skinny girls with like huge eyes, big lips, but like Chihiro has like chubby cheeks like me, small eyes like me, and like a dopey expression like me, and I saw so much of myself in her. And her struggles through the film, and in making Turning Red, I thought back to that feeling I had when I first watched Spirited Away, and I really wanted to make Turning Red for that 13-year-old me who was just searching for herself in media but couldn't see herself.
That's so cool. That brings me to thinking about that, because it's a question I ask people a lot. When was the first time you saw yourself on screen? And for people of color, it's, you could remember. And for, if you're a white male, you don't remember the first time because you always see yourself on screen. Do any of you have particular memories of when you saw, like, for you, was it the character in Spirited Away, or?
Earlier than that, it was probably Mulan. That was all we had. All we had was Mulan in Canada, and yeah.
How about you, Ruth?
I think the first time I saw myself on screen was when we put myself on screen with Spike Lee, and we had in School Days, And before that, I remember Vanessa Williams had won Miss America, and they took her crown away from her. And I remember that really scared me. It scared me because I thought that the industry was not ready to embrace someone who looks like me, and yet she overcame that adversity and rose again to the top. So I really do admire Vanessa Williams because we were parallel, and I saw myself in her.
Interesting. So we're talking about Bao, and I have to ask you, Domi, I was really intrigued when I read about your animated web comic series called My Food Fantasies. Can you tell us about those?
Oh, yeah. I think I just started that off as a hobby on the side. So I have an Instagram, and then I, in my spare time, and I think I'm such a foodie, and I love drawing food as much as I love eating food, and I came up with this whole series of My Food Fantasies, and like one of them was like, oh, like what if I could, like what if I had a dress made of meat like Lady Gaga, but then I like rolled on a grill and then it cooked the meat, and then I could eat my own outfit. That would be amazing. Yeah, and I've always used art as like a form of like release and therapy, and I mean, you can see that with Bao and with Turning Red, just how much I love food, and how much food is such a huge part of my life and like my culture and my background, and how like that was kind of just the way that my parents, my mom especially, showed her love for me was through cooking food for me, through feeding me. It wasn't through like words of affirmation like I love you or I'm proud of you. It's like, are you hungry? You look skinny, eat more, that's too much. Yeah, and I wanted to like, I think with each project like Bao and Turning Red, because the main characters are from a Chinese community, that of course like food was going to be like front and center in each of the stories. And it's also like very fun, but very like complicated to do in CG animation as well, because CG animation is good at doing like realistic, hard objects, but like food is very organic and soft, and yeah, expensive, but so worth it.
I love that. Gwendolyn, so James Cameron is just James Cameron, famously hands-on. How closely did you work with him on the sound design of Avatar, both Avatars?
He's, I think if he could do everything himself, he would. But he doesn't have the time, and he doesn't have the expertise to do that. So he has his hand in everything. Conveniently, I'd worked with him before. I worked on Terminator 2. I worked on Titanic. I worked on first Avatar. So we had a good understanding, and so he let me do some stuff that he was not involved with, and that was okay. But I think he usually works with the same people again and again and again, because you get a vernacular with him, and you can kind of handle him, so to speak.
I love how diplomatically you put that. So you develop kind of a shorthand, I'm guessing.
Yeah, definitely. I deal mostly with words and dialogue, so one of my favorite things about my job is I get to watch the actors and the directors work together, and sometimes it's not always good, but most of the time it's kind of like a summer camp reunion, and they get together and they kind of talk about the scenes, and I can hear them, I can listen to them direct them, and they kind of help them get back into their characters of who they were, and that's really, I mean, for someone on the back end of things, it's really, really nice to see, and also to understand, it helps you understand the performances and the characters better. The sound design is usually done by men. Not always, but usually done by men. It's kind of like this weird division. It's changing somewhat, I think, for the good. But I think that, if you're going to cut a car effect, you have to have balls or something like that, which is not true, because there are many, many good women effects editors out there, but the stereotype still persists. But I usually work with
sounds.
I worked with Chris Boyes on all the Cameron films, and he does the design for the creatures and stuff. He actually asked for some help on the tulkun, the main big whale type creature, and he said, you do dialogue, you know how to make a conversation, help me make these make it sound like sentences. And so we kind of collaborated back and forth on that kind of thing. And it was actually really fun for me to do something that was not just word syllables, actually trying to help him create this thing. So it's kind of fun, branch out a little.
Yeah. Well, it's so interesting because I think sound design is really important, and I'm not alone in that, but so many people focus on cinematography and the visuals, but sound is really, it's kind of the poor stepchild, but it deserves to be put, a little more on the front burner.
It's the kind of thing like a movie like Avatar, and Jim would get mad if I said that, but it really is like a giant animated film. I mean, yes, it's performance capture, but it is animated. All that water is fake. All that water is put in very specific places, and so if you don't have the right water, if you don't have the right sounds for what they're wearing, their costumes, you don't sell it in something that we can recognize as reality, it doesn't work. So we support the story and we support the characters by giving the audience something to, you forget that they're blue, you forget that they're not people, and that's because the visuals and the sound are working together in a framework that you can understand.
How do you create sounds, though, for things that that don't exist in our world, it exists in the Navi?
Like if you some of the stuff on this one is legacy stuff, but like you think about those creatures and those black, they're called viper wolves, black kind of leopard type creatures. It can't sound like a canary. It's got to have some heft to it. It's got to have some, or like the tulkuns, it's got to have a biological reason for sounding that way. If it's got a huge chest, it's not going to sound like this, so you have to, that kind of thing. All the various ships, the sea dragon and the helicopters, they're not real, but we work with the sound, the production designer, and we think, okay, this is a turbine here, and this is why it does this. And if you're working for Jim Cameron, there is a reason for every single piece of that part of that equipment, every reason why that thing has a gill there and an ear there and that kind of thing. So it has to make sense, even if it's something you've never seen before.
It sounds like something that if you're logical and almost scientific minded, that it would be. Which
Jim very much is. He knows the science behind every made-up creature.
Yeah. So you've worked on a lot of big movies like the Jurassic Park installments and Top Gun, as we mentioned, Captain Marvel, Mulan, Thor, TV series like WandaVision, as well as some smaller films like An Inconvenient Sequel and McFarland USA. How are all those experiences different in terms of sound?
In terms of sound, clearly there's budgetary differences, so you don't have as many editors, or you don't have as long to mix it, that kind of thing. But as far as how you approach it, it's more like if you're doing, sci-fi is clearly very different than McFarland, which is real people and real characters, and they're real human beings, and they're gonna run up the hills of nutshells, and so they're gonna sound, got to have all the breathing, got to have this physical reality of them running up those things, and it's just, I think, it's funny because you sort of approach every film the same way. You've got the production sound, you try and honor the performances that the picture editors and the directors have cut, and you make it as clean as possible. For instance, if you're doing a corset movie, you can't have an airplane, right? Because they weren't there. So you want to either try to find an alt, or they come in, they do ADR. So it's kind of, again, it's all about creating the reality. So you stop thinking that the fact that you're listening and watching a movie, you're so invested in it that you don't notice it. You should say, oh my God, that was like the coolest jetpack. You should be thinking, oh my God, this is a great movie.
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
Totally. Who makes the decision like whether something should have a musical score or have a sound effect or just any kind of sound?
It depends a lot on the director and sort of where they are in the process. Jim Cameron, for instance, you cannot have drums and guns at the same time. So if there's guns going, you ain't gonna hear any drums, pull them out. He dissected the score. It's like, okay, we've got this water going here, and that's gonna be that frequency. We've got this, and then the score is doing the same thing. Which one are we gonna hear? We're gonna hear the score there, we're gonna hear the water. And it was shot by shot. Some other directors, this is, going in, you spot it with the director, this is a music scene. So we're not gonna put ambience in there. We're not gonna put the sound effects in there because this is a musical moment. Other places, sometimes they change their mind and you get stuck. You're like, oops, we thought that was gonna be musical. Better quick put that stuff in. It's the best thing about it is it's a collaboration, it's a discussion, or they think the music's gonna carry it and it's just not quite right. So you kind of come in and out of different places. That's actually when a final mix, can be really fun because you're like, oh, that doesn't work. And oh my God, if you put like a beep somewhere, it's like, oh, all of a sudden it works.
Yeah.
You throw those last minute decisions often make or break a scene.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So I saw that you recently took on a new role as a producer for a short documentary.
I have a very small, lovely, wonderful production company that we are trying to make a feature, but we made a little short about a friend of mine's brother who died of an overdose, and so we did that. That was a while ago, pre-pandemic, but yeah, I was one of the producers on it. It was really fun to not do something about sound. It was really fun. So, yeah.
That's great. Mary, so Babylon still hasn't quite played that widely, so maybe if you could tell everyone a little bit about what it's about.
It's about it's based, the transition from silent film to sound and how many sort of tragedies that it actually spurred because it was such a ground-shifting change. And you follow a few of the characters, but I think the director was really intrigued by, he had started doing some research and just found that some of these stories of people who, first of all, it was such a new industry. It was so new in the early 20s, and there was no such thing as a movie star, and suddenly there was. And then they introduced sound, and in a matter of a year, there were people losing their jobs and losing their livelihood, and it was just the shift. It was like tectonic plates shifting, and it's the story of like 5 characters and how they transition from one to another. And it's, he was very intrigued by sort of the underbelly of Hollywood and the stories and the tragedies and the happiness and combining it all. And just, to me, it's like a very much, like his movies are often about dreamers. And so is Babylon. Every main character has a dream, and whether they fulfill it or they lose it and what happens to them. And it's so it's sort of like a continuation of his just filmmaking genre. But he wanted it to be massive and epic in scale and like nothing you've ever seen before. And when I read the script for the first time, I remember being quite shocked by it because, I had done La La Land and First Man with him. Both are pretty, not goody two-shoe, but just, they were not risque. And when I first read Babylon, it was like, what? And it was so naughty. And I was like, this is awesome. And like the visceral reaction I had from reading that script always stayed with me because that's what I wanted the audience to experience. And this raw energy of shock and emotion and carnality and visceral and just the creative spirit and the love of art, and it's about making art. And like we're going through such a transition with the streaming and movie theaters, and so it's like it has a lot of parallels to our current state to me, and that's how I responded to the script, and I hope that's how the viewers, and that was my, I always wanted it to feel very alive and visceral, and I'm hoping that's what the ultimate movie was. But it was a great experience, and it was a interesting, it was really a collaborative effort, like all the department heads, and it was such a dense script, like every line in between the scenes of dialogue would have then this 7-foot guy on stilts walks out, and then there's a 7-foot guy that's in a jester outfit, and then there's a gung pao makeup artist happening, and we would achieve all those things. And I have to admit, I watched the film in slow motion, because if you watch the film, there's a lot of panning shots. The camera is always moving, and you're like, wait, what happened? Like, I had to watch it in slow motion. I was like, oh, there it is, there it is, there it is. But what the ultimate effect of the film is that it's very layered, and it feels to me like if you turn a corner, or you peel up a carpet, or if you look in the other direction, you will still be in that world. And I think it's the ultimate collaboration between the director and production design, sound design. The composer had already composed the score, and so oftentimes we were shooting to score. It was so cool, and it was so immersive, and so that reality, like I mentioned before, like the lack of CGI, and it was just so in camera. Everything was in camera, and I know that that's like a weird term, but it just means that it's all what you saw while you were on set, and it was like you felt it on set, and you feel it in the movie, which is pretty cool. But it was so different. Like, I mean, we've all done tons of. It couldn't be more polar opposite than like The Ballad of Buster Scruggs or Macbeth. I had done The Tragedy of Macbeth the year before, which was the epitome of like, it was very stark and very solemn. It was black and white. There were very few people in it. And I mean, that's what's cool about our jobs, right? Like, you do one thing and you kind of like, okay, I've mastered that. And then you turn around and you do something like Babylon. You're like, what? It's just like schizophrenic in a way, but it's awesome, you know? And
fun, yeah.
That's why I feel like so lucky to have the job that I do. And I love it, and I've loved it my whole career, and I've been doing it a long time. And you know, it's like character development and world development, and you just get so into it, you know, and you're like living, breathing, dreaming it, and then it's over, and you're like, well, that happened, right? And like you have like a weird like hangover after. But
Yeah, you're all nodding.
Yeah, everybody. Yeah.
Everybody knows that. It's interesting because you mentioned how, I hadn't thought about it until you said it, the through line of Damien Chazelle's movies, each one of them has been about a dreamer in one respect, you know, going back to, oh my God, I'm forgetting the name.
Whiplash.
Whiplash, thank you. And then I was thinking, okay, you've worked with the Coen brothers, and there doesn't seem to be a through line, although maybe, you know, sort of a dark comedy, but in terms of each movie, each one feels so radically different one from the other.
Yeah, their films are very, very different, but they're stylistically, I feel like their scripts are very similar in that they're like reading a novel, and like a really good novel. And they have a very similar way of working. Like, their approach is, it's very script driven. They create the world on the page, and that is what we create in the film of what we're creating. And they're extremely collaborative. But I find their films to be stylistically,
yes,
they have a signature.
Yeah. More stylistic than thematically, but
yes,
yeah.
Yeah, and so that's what sort of, to me, is their through line. And, you know, I worked a couple times with Spielberg, and his are sort of story-driven and script-driven and totally different. Like, it's so fascinating, because every filmmaker is so different. Chris Nolan is very, very straightforward and very controlled, and has a very specific vision and knows exactly what it's going to look like. I mean, the thing that attracts me to the directors that I like to work with, I do like it when a director has written their script. To me, I find that to be, it's more of an auteur kind of driven piece, and like, they know the story so intrinsically that it's, you know, you work for me, I'd work for the director. Director is my boss, and then the actors, and then the producers, no offense. But I mean, I really, like, to me, it's like your job is to create their vision. Sure. And so Joel and Ethan are very much like that. They're visionaries, so is Damien and Spielberg and Nolan, and all, there's, you know, I've had the good fortune of working with a lot of really great directors, and I find that to be such a, like, that's how I choose my films, is by the director, really. I mean, I love a good story, obviously, but I love directors. I wish there were more female ones, and I really want to work with a female director.
Absolutely. Well, you touched on, the joy of like immersing yourself into something and the world building, and then all of a sudden you go on to something completely different. And I want to ask all of you, what's the best thing about your jobs? And I'm going to start with Anne.
Sure. I'm a big research nerd, so I would say that the best part is the beginning and just sort of discovering the idea. It could be in the archives, it could be elsewhere, and just digging in and it's like going thrift shopping. It's like a treasure trove. Like you just kind of go and you meander, and then you find, hopefully what you're looking for. But then there's all these miracles and other things surprises that come up, and I would say that's the best part.
That sounds great. Ruth.
I think the best part of my job is the transformation that happens in the fitting room between the actor that enters the room and the character that they become. I really feel like sometimes it feels like magic. It's you find colors that work with that person. You find fabrics. You discover. You go on this journey with another artist, and you're conversing and you're talking about character, because I like people and I like to see all of the differences in people, and I like to bring out the details of what makes a character come to life. And that moment in the fitting room when we feel like we nailed it and they're no longer themselves, they are the character and they are the storyteller, that's my favorite part.
Yeah, the transformation, yeah. Hannah.
I think for me, it's the thrill of reading a book or a script or an article or hearing someone tell you a story and having that moment of, oh, I know that's a movie. Like I know, I can see it. It's a movie. They have a vision, and it's the thrill of kind of falling in love, because I think you have to fall in love. It's so hard to get movies made. There's so many obstacles that come up, and they're really sort of a force of will, and you have to have the belief in the thing. And so I think it's hard. They're like diamonds in the rough to find the things that you think really can go the distance and are worth going the distance, or the people, the filmmakers, and then it's the joy of collaborating to make that happen. But I just think, I never get bored of, I just read a book last week that I fell in love with. Now it's my new love, and I'm really hoping to get to make that into a movie.
Can you tell us?
No.
Okay. Darn. Okay, well, we'll just be looking to see what your next project is. Tell me.
For me, my favorite part is just feeling and hearing the audience's reaction to your work, to the movie, to the story on the screen. I remember the first screening for Turning Red. We had worked for months and months building up the reels. Like we assembled something called a story reel, where we would storyboard the whole movie out, cut it to temporary sound, dialogue, music, and we would play the whole thing from start to end and invite like everybody in the studio to watch it. And you're kind of there, and it's that moment where you're like, oh my gosh, is this movie that's like super, super specific? It's a Chinese-Canadian girl going through magical hairy puberty in the early 2000s, and she's trying to get to a boy band concert. Like, will this resonate with everybody? And the moment in the movie where like her mom slams her sketchbook onto the table and shows her crush and all of the kids in the room that, her drawings of her crush as a weird, sexy mermaid, and the whole audience just laughed and cringed with May, like with the protagonist, like that was intoxicating. Like that was the best feeling ever, and like that was so incredible and like validating, and it's my favorite part, is just getting entire rooms full of people to react, to laugh, to cringe, and to cry from your work. It's amazing.
Yeah, it struck a chord. That's amazing. Gwendolyn.
I think for me, people have said this already, but it's the collaboration. You're working with people, everyone's at the top of their game, and everyone's bringing this idea and that idea. The director is, the composer is, the mixers are, the editors are, the picture editor is, and when that all works together, and it's like a goosebumping magic to me, and I will do it for as long as I can, because I love the work with the people. And also, every job is completely different. You can go from McFarlane to Jurassic World, and it's all good.
That's great.
I'm going to agree with Ruth. For me, it's the magic in the fitting room. It's, especially if you have a three-way mirror, and there's nothing like it. It gives me goosebumps every time. And you also feel like you're going on a journey with, like you said, a fellow artist, and you're helping them get to a place where they need to be. And oftentimes we're the first that they see and that they meet, and we've often done more research and we know kind of sometimes more about their character than they do. And like, for instance, on Babylon, Margot Robbie had just started doing some dance rehearsal, and she had this idea where she said, and she's so lovely and incredible, and she said, and I'm not going to try to do her accent because I'll butcher it, but she said, I have this idea where I'm assigning an animal to each of the scenes, and she said, in the opening sequence, I think I want to be an octopus. And in the fitting room, like, she was doing some of the arm movements that she had in her choreography, and we started draping the outfit that she wears in the opening sequence. And I knew from watching some of the dance choreography that we had lots of prototypes, but that we were going to probably land on sort of a tap pant, and that the idea of a sarong that she could just use as a tentacle. And like, those kind of, that's like magic happening, and you got, like, I get goosebumps talking about it now, and like, I was like, I got goosebumps, and it just kind of gels, and all of a sudden you have this, like, this character of Nellie comes to life in the fitting room, and it happens over and over again, right? It's like, I have, Rooster in True Grit. Like, I remember when Jeff Bridges, he puts on his boots and this coat and the eye patch, and he throws out his belly, and he puts his arms on his waist, and he like turned into the character in front of my eyes, and I was like, okay, done. I mean, basically you had to manufacture everything and blah, 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 but it's like the hat, it's just like, it is so cool. It's like a sculpture. It's like a live sculpture with an interior monologue, and it's just a magical, awesome thing, and that's the best part of my job.
Well, speaking of magical and awesome, you guys are so great. You're so inspiring to hear people talk about loving their work like this. How exciting is that, right? I want to say thank you to all of you. Congratulations to all of you. We'll be rooting for you on Oscar night. And thank you for this great conversation.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.